Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz stepped into a glass elevator that carried them toward the top of Toronto's glittering skyline, believing they were walking into an opportunity that could change their futures. Above them waited Daniel Mercer, a wealthy businessman with influence, secrets, and a carefully guarded life inside his luxury penthouse. Within hours, that same address would become the center of a national investigation, a courtroom battle, and a mystery that refused to fade. What began as a simple dinner invitation would unravel into a story of ambition, hidden financial dealings, and a night no one could fully explain. Toronto's skyline shimmered beneath a cold autumn sky, its glass towers reflecting the glow of city lights and the dark waters of Lake Ontario. At the very top of one of the most exclusive high-rises lived Daniel Mercer, a wealthy and well-connected businessman known in elite circles for his private gatherings. His penthouse was often described in magazines as modern, sleek, and untouchable, an address that symbolized power and success. Few people were invited inside, and those who were often believed their lives were about to change. Across the city, Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz were adjusting to their new lives in Canada. Both women had arrived from Pakistan only months earlier, carrying dreams of career growth and independence. Ayesha had a background in finance and hoped to secure a strong position in an international firm. Sanaa, skilled in digital marketing, was determined to prove herself in a competitive market. They worked hard, saved carefully, and stayed focused on building a stable future. Through a shared professional contact, they were introduced to Daniel Mercer. He appeared supportive and impressed by their ambition. Soon after, an invitation arrived for a private dinner at his penthouse. It was described as an exclusive networking opportunity with potential investors. For newcomers trying to establish connections, such an invitation felt rare and valuable. Friends later recalled that both women seemed excited but slightly nervous. The location alone carried weight. A meeting at the top of Toronto's skyline suggested importance. As the date approached, neither Ayesha nor Sanaa could have imagined that this opportunity would place them at the center of a tragedy that would soon capture national attention. On the evening of the dinner, the air in Toronto felt unusually still. The streets below the luxury high-rise were busy with traffic, but inside the building, everything appeared calm and controlled. At 8:17 p.m., security cameras captured Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz entering the lobby. They wore formal outfits, blending confidence with quiet anticipation. The polished marble floors reflected the bright lights above them as they approached the concierge desk. After confirming their names, they were directed toward the private elevator reserved for penthouse guests. The elevator doors closed smoothly, sealing them inside as it rose floor after floor without stopping. The ride to the top felt long, not because of time, but because of expectation. Above them waited a man with influence and opportunity. Below them remained the ordinary city they were trying to rise beyond. At 8:22 p.m., the elevator opened directly into Daniel Mercer's penthouse foyer. Cameras inside the hallway recorded their arrival, but offered no audio. The heavy doors shut behind them, and from that moment forward, there was no additional footage of the women leaving. An hour later, a faint sound echoed through the upper levels of the building. One resident later described it as sharp and sudden. Another believed it might have been something dropped or slammed. No alarms were triggered. No emergency calls were made. The building's security logs showed no unusual entries or exits. By 11:48 p.m., lights that had been glowing brightly in the penthouse went dark. From outside, the unit looked silent, almost peaceful. The city continued moving below, unaware that something inside the glass walls high above had gone terribly wrong. The next morning, just after 7:30 a.m., emergency services received a call from Daniel Mercer. His voice sounded strained as he reported a violent incident inside his penthouse. He claimed that sometime during the night, unknown intruders had entered his home. According to his account, he had been struck from behind and briefly lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he said he found Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz lying motionless in the living area. Paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by Toronto police officers. The building's management unlocked service elevators to give responders direct access to the top floor. When authorities entered the penthouse, they encountered a scene that immediately raised concern. The apartment appeared undisturbed at first glance. Furniture remained in place. Decorative items were intact. Nothing suggested a chaotic struggle or forced break-in. Daniel was seated near the kitchen island, holding a cloth against a minor cut on his forehead. Officers observed that he was alert and able to provide details about the alleged attack. He repeated that masked individuals had rushed inside shortly after dinner began. He insisted they demanded something he did not understand before everything went dark. Investigators carefully secured the scene. Forensic teams photographed every surface and collected potential evidence. There are no broken locks on the doors, no shattered glass, and no signs that windows have been opened. Security personnel confirmed that no emergency stairwell alarms had been triggered overnight. As the bodies of Ayesha and Sanaa were respectfully removed, detectives exchanged uneasy glances. The quiet perfection of the penthouse felt unsettling. Daniel's dramatic explanation seemed out of place in a setting that showed no visible trace of intrusion. Even before the full investigation began, doubts were already forming. By the second day of the investigation, detectives began focusing less on Daniel Mercer's emotional retelling and more on the physical evidence inside the building. Surveillance footage from a lobby was reviewed hour by hour. The cameras clearly showed Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz entering that evening. After that, no unfamiliar faces appeared. No one rushed out. No suspicious figures waited near the elevators. The private elevator required special access from the concierge desk, and logs confirmed that it had not been activated again until emergency crews arrived the next morning. Investigators then examined the stairwells and underground parking garage. Both areas were heavily monitored. There were no alarms, no forced doors, and no record of unauthorized access. If intruders had truly entered the penthouse, they had done so without leaving a single visible trace in a building known for strict security. Inside the apartment, forensic teams documented the scene carefully. The main door's electronic lock showed no tampering. Windows stretching from floor to ceiling were sealed and alarmed. Dust patterns on surfaces remained undisturbed. Even small decorative objects on glass tables had not shifted position. Attention turned to Daniel's injuries. Medical reports described them as superficial. There were no signs of defensive wounds or bruising consistent with a violent struggle. His clothing did not show tearing or damage. Detectives quietly compared his physical condition to the dramatic description he had provided. Financial documents found in his home office added another layer of concern. Unpaid notices, warning letters from creditors, and evidence of declining business performance painted a different picture from the confident image he presented publicly. The more investigators looked, the less his story made sense. Instead of supporting his account, the evidence created growing suspicion that the truth was far more complicated than a random attack. As investigators expanded their search beyond the penthouse walls, Daniel Mercer's carefully built reputation began to unravel. Public records showed that his investment firm had suffered heavy losses over the past year. Several high-risk ventures had collapsed quietly, leaving investors demanding answers. Lawsuits were pending in civil court, and confidential emails revealed tension between Daniel and several overseas partners. The image of a powerful, stable businessman no longer matched the financial reality hidden beneath polished interviews and luxury living. Forensic analysts examined his laptop and mobile devices. Although some files had been deleted recently, digital specialists were able to recover fragments of browsing history. Among routine searches were inquiries about insurance coverage related to accidental deaths within private residences. There were also documents outlining life insurance clauses and liability protections. The timing of those searches, conducted just days before the dinner invitation, immediately caught investigators' attention. Phone records showed frequent communication between Daniel and an international contact based outside Canada. The number was registered under a shell corporation connected to complex financial transfers. Large sums of money had moved through accounts tied to Daniel's firm and then disappeared into offshore holdings. Authorities began to suspect that the dinner may not have been purely social or professional. A deeper review of archived emails uncovered a draft message that had never been sent. In it, Daniel appeared to reference a problem involving investors connected to families in Pakistan. Though the message lacked clear detail, the language suggested urgency and concern about exposure. Detectives started to consider a darker possibility. If Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz were linked, even indirectly, to financial stakeholders who had begun questioning irregularities, their presence in Daniel's penthouse. Just as investigators believed the case was narrowing toward a single suspect, forensic analysis introduced a new and unexpected complication. Ballistics experts carefully examined the physical evidence recovered from the penthouse. The trajectory patterns did not fully align with Daniel Mercer's version of events. Based on positioning and angles, specialists determined that at least one shot had been fired from a location inconsistent with where Daniel claimed the intruders had stood. The geometry of the scene suggested a sequence that was more controlled than chaotic. Even more surprising was the discovery of trace gunshot residue in an area of the apartment Daniel had not mentioned. Microscopic particles were found on a decorative shelf near the far end of the living room, far from where he insisted the confrontation occurred. This detail raised the possibility that events unfolded differently from his account. Fingerprint analysis produced another unsettling twist. Investigators identified prints belonging to Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz on several surfaces, which was expected. Daniel's prints were naturally present throughout the penthouse. However, on metallic object recovered near the scene, forensic teams identified a third distinct set of fingerprints. The prints were clear, but did not match Daniel, the victims, or anyone registered within the building staff database. Authorities cross-checked the unidentified prints against national criminal databases, but no immediate match appeared. The presence of an unknown individual inside a highly secured penthouse created confusion. It suggested either a hidden accomplice or a visitor whose existence Daniel had deliberately concealed. The investigation shifted direction overnight. Detectives now faced two competing possibilities. Daniel had staged parts of the scene to mislead authorities, or someone else had entered the penthouse undetected. What initially seemed like a straightforward accusation was turning. With the unidentified fingerprints raising more questions than answers, investigators widened their focus beyond the penthouse and into Daniel Mercer's broader network. Financial crime units joined the case, examining his business relationships and offshore connections. Patterns began to emerge that suggested his investment firm was entangled in a much larger operation. Funds had been routed through multiple shell corporations before disappearing into accounts registered in different countries. The complexity of the transactions pointed to deliberate concealment. Traffic camera footage from streets surrounding the high-rise offered another critical clue. Analysts reviewing hours of recordings noticed a black SUV parked along a side street during the exact window of time the incident occurred. The vehicle had remained stationary for nearly 90 minutes before quietly driving away. License plate data traced the SUV to a corporation that existed only on paper. That corporation, in turn, shared registration details with one of Daniel's overseas financial partners. Detectives considered the possibility that someone connected to Daniel's business dealings had been physically present in Toronto that night. Travel records confirmed that one associate had entered Canada 2 days before the dinner and left early the following morning. Hotel logs showed a brief stay under an alias, paid in cash. Meanwhile, encrypted messages recovered from Daniel's phone revealed communication using secure applications that automatically deleted conversations. Although the exact content could not be restored, metadata confirmed exchanges during the hours surrounding the tragedy. Investigators began to suspect that Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz may have been connected, even indirectly, to investment funds tied to their extended families. If irregularities had been discovered, They could have represented a serious threat to those managing the money. After months of investigation, international cooperation, and forensic analysis, the case finally moved into a Toronto courtroom. Prosecutors built their argument around circumstantial evidence, financial motives, and the inconsistencies in Daniel Mercer's statements. They presented detailed timelines, security logs, ballistic reports, and expert testimony that challenged his version of events. The prosecution suggested that the dinner invitation had been carefully arranged and that the tragedy inside the penthouse was not random. The defense focused heavily on the unidentified fingerprints and the mysterious SUV. They argued that reasonable doubt existed because another individual may have been present. They emphasized the lack of direct video evidence showing Daniel committing any violent act. Without a clear recording of what happened inside the penthouse, they insisted the narrative remained incomplete. Financial investigators also testified about complex offshore transfers and shell companies tied to Daniel's firm. He faced multiple counts related to fraud and money laundering. Documents showed that significant funds had moved shortly before and after the night of the incident. Prosecutors implied that the dinner may have been connected to fears of financial exposure. The trial lasted several weeks. Expert witnesses reconstructed the scene using digital modeling. Jurors studied charts, timelines, and forensic diagrams. Public interest in the case grew, with media coverage highlighting the unanswered questions surrounding the third fingerprint and the unidentified associate who had briefly entered Canada. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury reached a split verdict. Daniel Mercer was found guilty on financial crime charges. However, due to lingering uncertainty surrounding the unidentified evidence, he was acquitted of murder. The courtroom reaction was quiet but heavy. For the families of Ayesha, Malik, and Riaz, closure remained out of reach.